Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to CamEd Live. I'm Tom Bramley, Director of the Research Division at Cambridge Assessment, and this is Tom Benton, statistician and psychometrician.
Should I say what a psychometrician is?
Psychometrician
is somebody who is involved in the science of measuring human psyche, the brain. So for an exam board, it's about the science of measuring how clever people are. That's why it's relevant here. So there you go.
Yeah. Thank you, Tom. And today we're going to be talking about and answering your questions about the new 9-to-1 grading scale in GCSEs. It's results day next week, and so it's a hot topic at the moment. If you do have a question, please type it into the box below the screen, and we'll get around to answering it once we've done some introductory stuff about GCSEs and the new 9-to-1.
Yes. So should we talk about why we've got 9-to-1, where it came from?
Yes.
It was 5 years ago that it was first announced.
Yes, it was part of the government reform of GCSE introduced by Michael Gove. And the idea was to make GCSEs contain more content, meatier, beefier, and some other reforms that would, make it a bit more like the old traditional exams. I mean, he was accused of being a traditionalist. So there's more exams taken at the end of the course.
This is the actual quote where he said, for why we're changing the grade scale. And this is a quote from 2013, to reflect the step change in expectations of pupils. That's actually said 5 years ago, but it's come through in practical terms in a lot of different ways.
Yes, so as I was saying, the exams are now taken all at the end of the course rather than in units, which could be taken in January or June. There's been a reduction in the amount of non-exam assessments, such as coursework, and as I say, less opportunity for resits. I think there's a November session for English and maths only, and less early entries, I think.
Yeah, and aside from that sort of, it's almost a cosmetic kind of changing, sort of to indicate to people the changes, but there are some advantages to having a numerical scale, I guess.
Yes, of course, statisticians such as yourself, Tom, and people in the government departments tend to use the grades for a number of purposes, but often to do that for their statistics, they need to convert the letters to numbers anyway. And obviously, if they're numbers to start with, then that step becomes easier. But of course, that raises the question, well, why not just go from 8-to-1? Because there were 8 categories in the A star to G.
That was actually the original suggestion 5 years ago. It was actually going to be the top grade was going to be 8-to-1, but then more grades added in at the bottom end, which made it 9-to-1. So that's what actually happened there. But we'll talk more about that bottom end in a moment. But yes,
because I mean, some people might say, what was wrong with the old scale? If it ain't broke, then why fix it? But I suppose looking at the old scale, there was C was always taken as the passing grade, and there were C, B, A, and A star, 4 grades C, but D, E, F, and G, same number of grades below it. And one of the aims was to introduce more discrimination at the top end and less discrimination at the bottom end. And I got some figures from GCSE Maths in 2016, the last year of the A star to G, and the proportion of people getting an A or an A star was around 20%, whereas the proportion of people getting E, F, or G was around 11%. So in a sense, we were making more fine discriminations at the bottom of the scale than at the top of the scale.
We've also got this. So part of the things Michael Gove wrote about with the new scale was, one of the things he quoted was a desire to differentiate performance more clearly at the top end, and that's where the new grade 9 comes in. So in the old A star to G scale, we had about roughly 7% of all GCSE entries getting an A star, and the target for grade 9 is that will reduce to 4%, maybe 5%. Of course, we won't know till next week when the results in, but that was the aim, just to have a slightly harder top grade.
Yes, I mean, in fact, 2017 was the first year for maths and English. So looking at the figures just for 16-year-olds in England for maths, we had, whereas before we'd had 11% getting the bottom 3 grades, E, F, and G, we now had 27% getting grades 1, 2, and 3. So we had sort of used those bottom grades more effectively. And at the top, the 20% who got A and A star previously is now distributed amongst those getting 9, 8 and 7, with roughly 3.5% getting the top grade 9.
Yeah, okay, I mean, there's a few bits where we've got this new grade scale, 9 to 1, where an A star to G. There are a few places where it is broadly equivalent in terms of grades being equally difficult in some places as in the old scale. So, I mean, the big one would be grade 4 is intended to be as hard as, not the same as, we'll talk more about that, but as hard as getting a grade C in terms of the same proportion of people would be expected to get a grade 4 or above as get grade C or above. So they've got that equally difficult thing, but probably in quite a different way.
Yes, because there's more content in the reformed GCSE. So, you know, I would do more for the teachers to teach and have possibly less time for them to teach each individual topic, and a desire to make the exams sort of maybe more rigorous. The question paper that itself may be more difficult, and so not quite the same experience for the candidates who take it as taking the old GCSE may have been.
Yeah, I mean, so it's hard to know whether this has happened, but in theory, you might be in the old system be able to get a grade C just by answering lots and lots of easy questions, whereas now you might answer less questions correctly, but they'll be harder questions. So it will be equally difficult overall, grade 4 and grade C, but the sort of way that is presented in an exam paper might be quite different. And that showed up quite a lot last year in GCSE maths. So 2016 again, to get a grade C, you needed about 30% of the marks on a higher tier paper, whereas in 2017, on the reformed fourth exam, you only needed 20% of the marks on the reformed higher tier paper to get a grade 4. So it was a smaller percentage of marks. Although it should be noted that in the case of maths, the exam paper itself is longer. Have to do more stuff, so the amount of things that people are doing correctly is probably about the same, but it looks different. Yeah.
Yes, and of course the decision to reduce the amount of tiering, which we'll talk about later, also perhaps can exacerbate that in the subjects which formerly were tiered but now aren't going to be tiered. Obviously, we don't know what's going to happen in those, but that'll be an interesting thing for people to look for when the results are out.
You know, we've also got, and the other part of it is sort of cosmetic side, that it may well feel different with the grades. You know, grade C, it felt like ABC. You know, you're quite near the top, whereas now it's 4, and you've got 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 all above it. So it may feel different to candidates, and it shouldn't do in many ways. You know, if you get a grade 4, that's just as hard, just as good an achievement as a grade C in the past. But it might feel different, and that might be the deliberate thing in terms of sort of trying to get people to have higher expectations.
Yeah. I think in fact that was stated, I think somewhere, I don't have the actual quote, but the idea that the 5 would become a new benchmark, which I think it is going to be for some school accountability purposes. Some will use the 4 and some will use the 5 as a benchmark.
Sure. So you know, one of the big new bits has been the introduction of grade 9. There are a few different methods that were considered to start with. I mean,
yes, it was obviously grade 9 being the top grade. A lot of interest in how this is going to be set. Previously, the old A star was set by sort of extrapolation. The grade B was set halfway between A and C, and the grade A star was the same distance above A as B was below it. And Tom's already said we've got the same equivalence between 7 and A, but we were sort of shooting in the dark about how to set the new grade 9. And several different methods were proposed, one of which would be the same idea as with the A star. So you've got 4 and 7, 5 and 6 between them, make the 9 the same distance above 7 in terms of the mark scale as 5 is below it. Another idea would be to say look at the proportion currently getting an A star and say let's have half the proportion who currently get an A star get a grade 9. Both of those, you know, had drawbacks, largely due to the fact that they're relying on sort of interpolations and extrapolations from grades that aren't actually set. The grade 7 is actually set, so the third method that was looked at was why not have 20% roughly of the people who get a grade 7 or above getting the top grade, a grade 9. And that seemed to be the favoured solution, but Tom here spotted a flaw in it and proposed a solution.
Yeah, so we did look at this, I can't even remember what it was a few years ago when these discussions were going on. particularly in some of the high attaining subjects. And what you find actually in a pattern, looking at results historically, if you look at subjects where you have more people who got A and above, you tended to find a line where a higher proportion of those people, of them who got A and above, would get the top grade, would get A star. And that was very clear across a lot of subjects. So the extreme cases would be things like Latin. So historically, we had sort of roughly 80% of people who enter Latin, a very high attaining group. About 80% of them would have got A and above, did get A and above. And of those, over half actually got the A star. Now, that wasn't because Latin was a very easy GCSE. In fact, when you looked at these candidates, how well they did in other GCSEs, compared their performance in Latin to their performance in other things, if anything, it looked like Latin might be one of the harder ones. So there's no suggestion it's because Latin is too easy. So it's something else. It's about the cohort. And this is the pattern that we see a lot of the times where we have subjects with very high ability entries. Not only do we expect more people to be getting A and above, we expect more of those to be getting the top grade, whether that be A star or grade 9. So the work I did and the research around it was, how can we keep this central aim? We want the number of grade 9s to be about 20% of the number who historically have been awarded an A. We want that kind of overall grade, but we also want to take into account as a sliding scale subjects that attract high ability entries. More of the top grades are going to be in grade 9, and we want that fixed into the system. And to deal with that, I came up with a formula. It's published on our website. It's a report talking about development of it in our research reports section. So if you like statistics and maths and how we do things, then do take a look at that. And came up with a fairly simple formula. It's just a bit of multiplication, working from the percentage you get A and above, which would be, or indeed percentage you get 7 and above, and then working out on a sliding scale. Okay, how's that going to translate into what proportion of those should get grade 9? So we got that working, tried it out, and that's the one that's been accepted, and hopefully will be fairer on subjects with high ability entries, single sciences, Latin and Greek. Another thing we looked at is what happens to the grade boundaries in these subjects if we just applied 20% of those getting 7 above should be awarded grade 9, and you ended up with grade boundaries in ridiculously high places, 95% of marks, 98% of marks. So that it didn't look right, and this should end up, the new way we've suggested should end up with more reasonable looking positioning of boundaries.
And I think you should know that this formula of Tom's is just used in the transition from the old scale A star to G to the 9 to 1. I think once the 9 to 1 is established and going, they'll be using different methods to map the 9 from one year to the next.
Yes, right? I would think so. I would hope so. And the other thing to say is obviously it's a difficult decision. There's no right answer, as it were, with the new grade 9. You can put it anywhere. The only specification is it's the top grade, and we need to have less of them overall than we had A stars. So that's the only thing. So there's no right answer, but it might be that over the years, over the coming years, we do more work looking at inter-subject comparability, and are there any tweaks that need to be made? That might be a subject of future research.
Yes. I mean, and I think in future years, it's likely that grade 9 will, like grade 7, be a grade that is set at the time of the awarding meetings, where all the boundaries are determined.
Yeah, hopefully looking at what people have actually done and getting more of an idea for teachers and other people about what that looks like in terms of what people are getting right and what they're achieving, what they're writing.
Yeah. And of course, in some subjects, possibly many, we'll find out this year, it may be that the actual location of the grade 9 boundary isn't too far different from where the A star boundary would have been.
Yeah, and we could look at that. I mean, that's available for a little bit for 2017. If you look back at the grade boundaries that are published then in, for example, English language in 2017, you can see where the actual grade boundaries are, 7, 8, and 9. But then you can also use the old arithmetic rule that Tom was talking about to work out where the A star boundary would have been if you had applied that rule, set it. And for English language, you actually find it's a fairly small difference between where A star would have been and where grade 9 is. So it's sort of 3 marks out of 160. And this is quite an important point. Grade 9 overall likely to be a bit more difficult to achieve than an A star, but it's not an enormous difference. It's just a little nudge up of what's required. And that's quite important for interpretation. Especially over the next few years, we've got people applying for universities. Some will have done reform GCSEs, some won't. You have to compare between grade 9s and A stars. And I think our advice would be don't get too carried away with the difference between those two things. They're generally going to be quite close in terms of what's required.
Yes, and I think the fact that fewer people, it was known that fewer people would be getting a grade 9, meant a lot of there's a lot of interest in how many people would get the clean sweep of 9s across all their subjects. And Tim Lunig, who is Chief Scientific Officer at the Department of Education, tweeted in April 2017 that it would be only 2 people.
I think it was flippant. I think it was starting a conversation.
Started the conversation, yes. We thought it was probably a bit on the low side. That was as far as I got, but Tom went a bit further.
Yeah, so this came out, and one of the things that worried me about something is, we've got this new top grade. You don't want people to worry, and obviously it's A star already. If anybody gets an A star, it's brilliant achievement. You've already done really well, and obviously it's even harder than that. But I didn't want people to get the impression that it's some ridiculously hard standard, and it's virtually impossible to get grade 9, which isn't true. It is possible. So I wanted to look more into that and into this. How many would we really expect to get a clean sweep or straight grade 9s across everything? And so the starting point is getting straight A stars already very hard. It's sort of roughly 0.5% of everyone who takes a reasonable number of GCSEs will get it. So it's going to be harder than that. So it's already a very high standard, and working from there. And it is quite a tricky calculation. It's one of those things, because we don't hold, as an exam board, data on every GCSE taken by every person with all the marks. It makes it tricky. If you had that, you could just say, okay, let's use these rules we've talked about, these grade 9 formulas, and set boundaries on all the exams as if they had a grade 9, or the old pre-reformed exams as if they had a grade 9, and then just count, okay, how many people got straight grade 9s. But multiple examples of the data spread out, so it made it a tricky mathematical problem to work out. And sort of the big thing you have to work out, even though it's fairly straightforward to work out how many people are going to get grade 9 in one subject, because there's a formula that tells you how that's going to look. You've got to work out, if you get 1 grade 9 in your first subject, say maths, what's your chance of getting grade 9 in your second subject, English? And if you get 2 grade 9s, what's your chance of getting it in a third? Because obviously you're quite clever. If you've got those 2 grade 9s, it must be a pretty high chance of getting a third, and so on. And you've got to sort of build up this picture. And the way that's normally done in psychometrics is to sort of assume this underlying thing called general ability. Okay, so you assume everybody has some level, which is it just describes how likely are you, given any exam, how good are you at exams? What's your chance of getting, different grades on that? And then you say, okay, at different levels of general ability, what's your chance of getting, different grade distributions? And in particular, what's your chance of getting the straight grade 9s? And then you work across the ability distribution and try to extrapolate upwards how many people are going to get the clean sweep of grade 9s. And the answer is quite tricky. First thing says that you've got to define what you mean by clean sweep. Is it a clean sweep if someone only takes 1 GCSE? So suppose they're doing other qualifications instead, or they took a load early. Does that count? And the answer is probably no, but it would make quite a big difference. So you have to decide what you mean. So if you say, okay, let's have, it's going to be about, we're only going to include people who do at least 8 GCSEs. If you do that, we might be talking 200, 300 people is our prediction for how many people. Of course, there's a lot of assumptions in doing that.
I'm going to plug our research journal, Research Matters here. You can see all Tom's calculations in Excel format if you want to try to repeat them yourself and improve on them. So this is a hard copy. It's also available on our website. You can download.
Yeah, and there's a whole bunch of predictions depending on different ways of defining the clean sweep. And there, one interesting one is to use the accountability measure that's been used more recently, which is called Attainment 8. which broadly, very broadly, takes people's best 8 grades and say, okay, what's the chance of people getting a perfect score in their attainment 8? And I've got my prediction there. If you do that, we're talking thousands, maybe 2,000 or 3,000 people that we expect to get a perfect attainment 8 score. All very speculative, but all these numbers are higher than 2.
Yes.
That's the point. So I'm hoping
when the results
come out, it will prove true that grade 9, sure, really, really big achievement, especially getting a clean sweep in grade 9, but not ridiculous. It should be beyond that. So we'll see. And of course, we won't really know. I mean, we'll get a reasonable idea next week. We won't really know for a few years because there's a lot of subjects that aren't on the 9 to 1.
It's been phased over several years.
Yes.
So it was maths, English language, and English literature in 2017. A whole host more subjects this year: science, history, geography.
Yes.
Next year, things like psychology, statistics, business studies.
Yeah. Design technology. So there's a bunch coming in next year and a few the year after. So I won't know for definite whether I've got the right answer until 2020.
2020, yes.
By which time everyone will have forgotten.
That's right.
So we'll see then. But hopefully not too far off this year. We'll have to see. Yes. So that's enough about research I've done.
Right.
Things you were interested in was about the aspect of tiering, which has changed quite a lot.
Yes, we mentioned earlier that fewer subjects are going to be tiered now, and tiering, in a sense, creates a challenge for the exam boards because you have some of the grades available on both tiers. So as well as trying to get the values in the right place, you have to try to make sure that somehow the overlapping grades that are available on both tiers in some sense mean the same thing or are set at the right point. And I think the way that's being tackled with the reformed GCSEs is by including common questions between the higher tier and the foundation tier.
Quite a reasonable percentage of overlap.
Yes.
It's not tiny. There's quite a lot that is in common, but also some different content.
Yes, and from my point of view, it's the different content that can provide the, if you like, the interpretational challenge. Because if students who are doing the foundation tier aren't taught the full range of content that people on the higher tier are taking, then you're not quite sure what to infer from their grade 4 or 5, because on the certificate you don't know which tier they did, and so once people have moved on, you don't actually know what range of content they were exposed to and how well they did on it. I did a blog on our website earlier this year about discussing some of the issues there and pointing to quite a bit of the research that we've done on tiering. And I think it'll be interesting when the results come out just to see what schools' policies have been with regard to whether they enter their students for the foundation or the higher tier. Because I'm guessing that in the first few years we may see quite a few changes in terms of how people go about that.
Yeah, and also in terms of what gives candidates a reasonable experience. And,
yes.
Making sure it is appropriate. But I mean, one of the things about reformed GCSEs is that there are now a lot less GCSEs that have tiers at all.
Yeah.
It's been cut right down. And the good thing about that is there's no danger of someone being entered for the lower tier who could have achieved a high grade, so having their sort of achievement capped, and they've done really, really well in this foundation tier. And in fact, if they had done the higher tier, they could have done a really high grade. Again, something we've looked at in the past, but that's gone. But there are still some places where you've kept tiering, and several good reasons for doing that. Yeah.
Yes, I mean, obviously the advantage of tiering, particularly in subjects where it's been retained, like maths and science, is that it's generally been accepted by experts that it's quite difficult to compose a single test that can give the full range of candidates who take GCSE, a meaningful experience in the exam. As in, you don't want to have the very brightest mathematicians having to do a load of very easy questions for them. Similarly, the weaker ones, a very off-putting and demoralising experience of having a very hard paper. So the principle behind tiering, I think, is a very good one. Certainly from a psychometrician's point of view, you can target the test to the people who are taking it.
And thereby save them a lot of time. Yeah. Would be the thing. So you're not wasting high abilities candidates' time by asking them loads of really, really easy questions. They're just going to have to, it's just time spent writing in what are already quite long exams. So it saves, it saves it in that way. And the other good bit of tiering, which was often used as an argument, is that when people get grades at GCSEs, it is nice for them to represent them having done something positive. It's not just a ranking and this is how much you failed to get there, but if you get any grade, it's nice if it can be, it means they've got a reasonable amount of stuff correct as a positive interpretation. Yeah. So in order to do that, it's important you have that foundation tier to allow people, maybe not the highest ability, to demonstrate what they can do. They're not just sitting in the exam room getting all the things wrong, they're able to show what they've learned.
Yes, and I think that works very well with the foundation tier. The problem that we can have, and that we mentioned at the start of this, was that on the higher tier, if not all the grades are available, there's the danger that people who don't get the lowest grade that's available then don't get anything. They get an ungraded. So the higher tier grades do extend downwards towards grade sort of 4 and 3. Yeah. And of course, then when the grade boundaries become published, people look at those boundaries that on the higher tier and see that they're at a very low percentage of the overall total and say, oh, you only need to get 20% of the marks to get a good pass on the exam. So it creates a sort of, if you like, a communication problem for the exam boards. We have to sort of explain why this is the case.
Particularly with the harder.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's a new thing now, but no reports saying that it's easier now should, because the boundaries are lower, should be taken seriously. Maintain the same difficulty, grade 4, grade C, grade 7, grade A. That's absolutely true. Yeah. Okay. I mean, one thing we haven't mentioned actually, we talked about the 9-to-1 scale. We've got a more complicated scale for combined science. Was it additional and core in the old system?
Yes, and now it's more like when GCSEs first came in. There's a double science or combined science, it's called, and the separate sciences.
Yes, so rather than taking two combined science GCSEs, core science and additional science, it's now just one combined science GCSE that counts as a double, and the grading scale on that is set up so that you actually get 2 grades. You might get 9-8 or 5-4 or 4-4. And that gives it that more fine-grained scale. And partly it's done just to represent the fact it's double the teaching time.
Twice as work, yes.
Exactly. So it is worth 2. And with the grades there, it's always with 2 numbers next to each other. You never get 8-1 or anything like that going on. And always the higher number first. So,
yes. So it doesn't actually tell you about which bit of science you've done better in the physics or the chemistry. It's this is an overall composite.
Yeah.
Your achievement.
That's right, and it's a more complicated thing in terms of the maintaining standards over time. It's a little bit more complicated because you're going from 2 separate GCSEs, and not everyone did both of them. Quite a lot of people would have only done the core science, to everyone having to do a double science. So there's a bit of a change there, and the rule that's been announced is that having the grade 4-4, 2 4s, is going to be as hard as getting a grade C in both core science and in additional science. It's harder as getting 2 Cs, as it were. So the interpretation there is slightly different to the other GCSEs.
And again, we'll find out next week
how it's worked out.
Yeah, how it's all worked.
That's right.
Have we got any questions come in? All right, we're reaching a global audience here. We've got viewers in Vietnam, Uganda, Iraq. Welcome to you. Thank you for joining us. And we've got a question here. Can you recap how each of the old lettered grades match up to the new numbered grades? So, as we heard earlier, the A on the old scale matches to a 7. Although, as we were talking about earlier, that's not necessarily in the experience of them doing the course or doing the exam.
It's as hard.
That's as hard.
A is as hard as 7, equally difficult.
Yeah. And 4 matches up to the old C.
Yeah.
Those are the 2 anchor points. And then 1 to the old G, actually.
Yes.
Although, in practical terms, when you actually have to set the boundaries, often there are very few students down at that end of the scale, so it's harder statistically to find out where to locate the G. But so the G at 1, the C at 4, and the A at 7 are these sort of points of comparison.
And then so the 9 isn't specifically tied to an old grade, but often just a little bit above the A star, just by a touch. And then we've been asked, what are awarding meetings? I think you've been to more than me.
Yes,
so,
well, these the meetings when the grade boundaries are decided upon, where a number of expert examiners get together and decide where the boundaries should go. It's quite a complicated task because most assessments have a number of different components to them. So, for example, in maths, there'd be a paper 1 and a paper 2. Often there may be, in some subjects, there's an element of non-examined assessment. So you've got the students with scores on all of these things, and the overall grade scale has to be worked out by aggregating these different components. And the purpose of the awarding meeting is to find out whereabouts on the overall aggregate mark scale the different grade boundaries are going to lie. And that's done by considering a whole range of evidence. A lot of it these days is statistical evidence based on the achievement of students relative to their attainment at Key Stage 2, taken sort of 5 years earlier. But also, in some cases, there's inspection of the quality of work.
There's always inspection of the quality of it. There will always be subject experts at the awarding meetings. And although it's very statistically driven, there would certainly be checking, does this look reasonable, so that we wouldn't, we wouldn't just award 5% of A stars anyway if everyone just wrote rubbish on their papers. It doesn't happen, but there was that check.
And the board's keeping an archive of work from previous years. So, an awarding meeting will start by people looking at the work that was awarded in A, if it was in the old system, in the previous year, so they can sort of familiarise themselves with the standard of work that's to be expected at that level.
Okay, another question. Does this apply to all exam boards in the UK or just some? So it applies to all exam boards in England. So that's going on all the time. Wales and Northern Ireland having a slightly different system. Broadly speaking, Wales are not changing. They're sticking to the old A star to G system. Northern Ireland are sticking to the A star to G system, but changing what they mean
to make it more like,
to line it up more with the 9 to 1. So there are a lot of different changes going on there.
Yes. Probably best to look at the the websites of the regulators in those countries to find out the sort of definitive answer.
Yes, but certainly in England, everyone's doing the same thing. It's all regulated and in line, and there's no differences. How does numerical, a grade, affect my university application? I used to need a C in maths and English. What do I need to do now? So that will be up to individual universities, what they said as entrance requirements. I don't know if many have stated yet. I don't think I've had applications from that cohort to university yet.
It hasn't reached that. I mean, in terms of what we were talking about, the equivalencies, presumably 2 4s would be the same as the C.
Unless a university decides to take this opportunity to require a higher standard, then 4 is the same as a C. Okay, that's all the questions for now. So we'll finish here.
Yes, thank you for watching, joining us. We'll continue to monitor the Twitter and the Facebook feed for any more questions and respond to those over the next few days.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.